Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. My name is Denis Chagnon, and I have the distinct privilege of being your Master of Ceremonies this evening. It is truly heartwarming to see so many of you here in Calgary for the 41st Annual Induction Dinner and Ceremonies of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. Ce soir, nous rendons hommage à 4 pionniers de l'air qui ont transformé l'aviation canadienne. Our 4 new inductees this evening will bring total membership in the Hall of Fame to 216. In keeping with tradition, we begin our celebration with the entrance of our inductees, led by Piper Major Stephanie McSween and the Calgary Police Service Band, accompanied by the Royal Canadian Air Cadets, 538 Buffalo Squadron, 88 Lynx Squadron, and 781 Calgary Squadron. Ladies and gentlemen, as they walk away, let's have another warm round of applause for the Calgary Police Service Pipe Band. In a very real sense, holding this year's gala in Calgary brings us back to our roots. It all started with a meeting of aviation notables in Calgary on March 31st, 1973. A headline in the Herald captured the mood of the day. Hall of Fame aviators gather in Calgary. A few months later, on August 2nd, the Hall of Fame was incorporated. Il fallait ensuite décider où placer le Panthéon. Winnipeg, Toronto, Montréal, Ottawa. After considerable discussion, Edmonton was the preferred choice, but it took until 1992 for the Hall to find a permanent home in the Reynolds Alberta Museum at Wetaskiwin, just south of Edmonton. This Museum of Transportation and Industry is today a world-class destination, and the aircraft collection is one of the most historically significant groupings of vintage aircraft in Canada. As you browse through the museum, take time to read the biographical panels about the men and women who helped to make Canadian aviation among the most admired and respected anywhere. Together, they give meaning to our vision and mission to keep our aviation heroes, leaders, and innovators in the hearts and minds of Canadians, and to honor those individuals and organizations that have made outstanding contributions to aviation and aerospace in Canada, and to collect, preserve, exhibit, and interpret artifacts and documents, thereby inspiring and educating Canadians. While the Hall did find a home in Wetaskiwin, it also lives right across the country and around the world, thanks to our newsletter, The Flyer, and our very attractive website. Je vous invite d'ailleurs à consulter ces deux publications pour tout connaître de nos héros et de nos activités. Et je vous invite aussi à devenir membre du Panthéon. I do encourage you all to join the Hall and help us perpetuate the memory and accomplishments of our Canadian aviation pioneers. And now, it is my pleasure to invite to the lectern the Chairman of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame, Mr. Tom Appleton, for his official welcoming remarks. Tom?
Merci, Denis. Honored guests, inductees, members, friends of the Hall, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir. On behalf of the Board of Directors, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this, the 41st Annual Induction Gala in the magnificent campus of our venue sponsor, WestJet, to witness the induction of the 2014 nominees to Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. C'est un grand honneur pour moi de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à ce 40e gala de Panthéon de l'Aviation du Canada, alors que nous rendons hommage à 4 grands pionniers de l'aviation canadienne. As always, this year's nominees were selected from a bank of many promising applications submitted by former colleagues, interested observers, or members of the general public who believe deserving individuals should be nominated for membership in the Hall. Staff of the Hall of Fame, members of the Operations Committee, and members of the Board of Directors are not permitted to file nominations. Nominations must be filed by third parties, individuals, or teams, and that means all of you folks. The selection process is a rigorous analysis of the merits of each individual application at the annual convocation of the Nomination Review Committee. The members of this committee are outstanding Canadians with a very broad range of aviation and aerospace experience, each one highly regarded in his or her field. Their assessment is enhanced by preserving the anonymity of the members of the NRC to avoid outside pressures being brought to bear during their deliberations. Submissions not selected in any one year are retained on file for future use, as many as 10 years, or for future amendment as new and relevant facts are submitted. Such submissions are reconsidered every year, and it's not unusual for some members to be selected many years after the initial filing. Il ne fait aucun doute que la rigueur du processus de sélection du Panthéon reflète à la fois les remarquables qualités et la réputation sans faille de tous et celles qui se méritent en place parmi les plus grands héros de l'aviation au Canada. The end result, we believe, is a fair and objective selection process that finds the best candidates and awards them the admission to Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. Through this fact-based, objective selection process, we honour the heritage of those who have contributed so much to Canada's proud aviation heritage, to inspire youth, and to look forward to the career opportunities before them. My thanks go to Blaine Fowler and the members of the Operations Committee based in Wetaskiwin, who do the legwork throughout the year that sustains the development of the Hall. There is always a need for enthusiastic and passionate volunteers at our Wetaskiwin headquarters. It can be a challenging, motivating experience for those who drive with the drive and the inspiration to preserve Canada's aviation heritage, and I encourage anybody interested to contact Blaine or any of the members of the operations team. Je tiens à remercier les membres du comité de sélection pour leur jugement, leur neutralité et leur dévouement dans l'exercice de leurs fonctions. Ce n'est pas un travail facile et ils ont accompli de façon exemplaire. Finally, I'd be remiss if I did not thank those companies and organizations whose names and logos you see this evening for their incredible sponsorship and support. Without their help, we would not be able to produce this event and properly honor those being inducted to Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame this evening, to recognize the heritage of those who have contributed so much to Canada's aerospace development. Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, I trust you'll thoroughly enjoy tonight's 41st Induction Gala of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. Bonsoir.
And so we begin with our first inductee, Clive Beddoe.
Coming to Canada from England to pursue opportunities as an entrepreneur, Clive Beddoe enjoyed early success in business and began to fly as a private pilot. Seeing an opportunity in the aviation industry, he became a co-founder of WestJet Airlines, establishing an innovative new company that became a national airline. Born near London, England on May 26, 1945, to his parents Kathleen and Kenneth, Clive Beddoe would move to Canada as a young man to pursue his dream, establish himself in business, and build a new Canadian airline. Clive's father flew as a navigator bomb aimer on Bristol Beaufort torpedo bombers with the Royal Air Force during the Second World War. And while Clive was attending Epsom College, established in 1855 in Surrey, England, it was during his teenage years that he developed an interest in aviation and joined the Air Force Cadet Corps at the college, which provided the opportunity to fly a glider. Following graduation, Clive moved to Canada in 1970 to find challenges in business and soon found himself soaring with gliders in southern Alberta after settling in Calgary. Soon he was flying his own aircraft, a Cessna 172, earning a private pilot license and eventually a multi-engine rating and a helicopter endorsement. But it was ownership of a Cessna 421 Golden Eagle that made Clive realize the economics of larger aircraft that led to the creation of WestJet. With co-founders Donald Bell, Mark Hill, and Tim Morgan, Clive set out to build a low-cost airline, and after an incubation period of 18 months, the dream became a reality, with flights as low as $29 from Edmonton to Calgary. It was a move welcomed by travelers, and the airline's intention to offer easily affordable airfare was a move that caught the attention of the media. WestJet took to the air with its first Boeing 737, and the Calgary staff celebrated the first flight on February 29, 1996. On board for that flight were Clive and his wife Ruth, his mother Kay, and children Kaylee and Sean. Today, the Calgary-based airline flies 100 Boeing 737 aircraft, reaching some 90 locations. After a start on routes in Western Canada, WestJet was soon flying coast to coast, offering vacation packages and reaching destinations beyond Canada. In 1999, Clive was recognized by one publication as the Business Person of the Year, and in 2000, WestJet co-founders Mark Hill, Donald Bell, Tim Morgan, and Clive Beddoe shared honors as the Ernst & Young World Entrepreneur of the Year at ceremonies held in Monte Carlo. Another occasion for celebration by Clive and Ruth when WestJet's early success was recognized only 4 years after the airline's first flight. An accomplishment recognized by Canadian business press in telling the airline's story, and Clive's contribution to the airline industry earned recognition for his accomplishments. At the controls of a backhoe, Clive Beddoe helped with the groundbreaking ceremonies to start construction of the head office, and on May 4, 2009, the new $100 million facility for the airline's head office was opened as WestJet Campus at Calgary International Airport. While managing an airline that showed steady growth and operated as a profit was Beddoe's primary concern, he held other interests as well. Shortly after coming to Canada, Clive became an enthusiastic fisherman, an interest that remains today, especially with a good catch on the Bow River. And recreational sailing as captain of his own boat has long been a special interest for him. While in the air, flying in a Canadian Forces CF-18 jet from the Cold Lake Air Base with 409 Squadron was a highlight of his aviation experience. Honored many times for his business success and charitable work, Clive Beddoe has received an honorary doctorate degree from the University of Calgary and an honorary doctorate from Wilfrid Laurier University, as well as receiving the university's award for Outstanding Business Leader of the Year. He has been recognized by the University of Victoria as Distinguished Entrepreneur of the Year, and from the University of Alberta, he received the Canadian Business Leader Award. Clive Beddoe has seen his company grow to include over 100 Boeing 737 aircraft, starting transatlantic service to Dublin in 2014, while in 2013, WestJet Encore began regional service with Bombardier Q400 aircraft. Under Clive's leadership, his airline has enjoyed continued growth and profitability while changing the face of airline passenger service in Canada. Clive Beddoe was inducted as a member of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame at ceremonies held in Calgary on May 29, 2014.
Wow, I must say I find this very hard to comprehend. You know, I started my aviation career, as you probably saw, back in England, but my inspiration for flying really came from two completely different sources. One was when I was a very young boy. I realized my father, or our father, my brother is here with me too. I learned that he was in the last war in the Air Force in England, and I learned that he was a bomb aimer navigator, and yet he had been a private pilot before the war. And I couldn't understand. I mean, when you're young, you think your parents are pretty stupid, and I thought my father was really dumb to be wanting to do math lying on the belly of an airplane when he could have been flying it. And I realized that's not going to be me. I'm not going to be there, so I'm going to learn how to fly when I get older. And then the second inspiration I got was when I saw a movie called The Battle of Britain, and I saw those incredible pictures of Spitfires and Hurricanes diving on the attacking German aircraft into Britain. And I just thought, what an incredible experience that must be to fly. So I figured I have to learn to fly one of these days. And I started my flying career in England at Lasham, learning to fly gliders, and at the school I was at. Came to Canada and really enjoyed flying here. Couldn't believe the conditions of the opportunity to fly gliders. And it was really from all of that this occurred. I'm here tonight because of all of that. And it's extraordinary for me to imagine that as a young man back in those days that I could be inducted into the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame today, and that our name would be join all of those amazing aviators who've done so much for Canada and built such an incredible aviation industry, and that I should be a part of that, or even the thought that I could have been part of that when I was growing up is quite frankly mind-blowing. And I'm truly deeply honored, and I really am somewhat lost for words to know how to express my gratitude to the Hall of Fame, its committee, its selection committee, and so forgive me, but it really is a bit overwhelming. You know, the creation of WestJet was not entirely my idea. It was the group of us that created it. But you know, I get so much of the credit for it, and yet really much of that credit should be given to the 220 WestJetters who were part of our founding membership team. Some of them are here tonight, and actually I'd rather like you to stand up, some of you original WestJetters. Come on, Bill, come on, Gareth, come on, stand. Some of these guys were the original guys. "220 of us started out with this dream to create an airline, and they did an amazing job. And what was so inspiring for me, what gave me so much satisfaction, I think, over the years, is to see how they have, with their enthusiasm and energy and commitment and determination, helped build an airline that, quite frankly, we hope is something a little different from what has been around before. And I owe a deep gratitude to all of them. They've been incredible members of the team, and not just those 220, but the 10,000 that now represent WestJet today, and the enormous energy that they put into making our airline something different. And I'm incredibly indebted to all of them. None of this happens without the support of an enormous number of people, and one of whom I really would like to honor, Mr. Ron Green. I think you're here tonight somewhere, Ron and Barb. Perhaps you'd like to stand up also. Our very first shareholder, our very first investor, a man who served on our board of directors for many years, and a great friend, and without his guidance and help, I'm sure WestJet wouldn't be where it is today. So Ron, thank you very much indeed. You know, as you go through life, you learn a few things, and one of the things that I've learned from my experience at WestJet has been that, in truth, we are really only a bunch of ordinary people. There's nothing special about any of us, and we should remember that. Hopefully anybody who's with WestJet today should remember that. But what we did, through passion, determination, commitment, energy, and enthusiasm, we did some amazing things and continue to do some amazing things. But staying humble has been an enormous part of that, and I stress the importance of that for all of us in the future. But we did it in Western Canada without a dime of government help. And to me, as I believe we all did, I think that all the pioneers in aviation just shows that it doesn't help to have government help. But one of the things I learned from all of this is that it's amazing what you can unleash in people when you give them the right environment, train them, attract the right people, train the right people, bring them into your organization and inspire them. And there's a story I'd like to tell you about that really, to me, exemplifies what I mean by how you can change people's behavior with the right stimulus, the right environment. I was, many years ago when we used to fly 737-200 series airplanes, our fuel cost in Alberta didn't have fuel tax attached to it, and the fuel cost in British Columbia did. And so we used to have to figure out, well, was it worth our while to buy fuel here enough that we could fly to Vancouver and fly back again without buying fuel in that province? But there were a number of factors involved, including the cost of carrying that fuel. And so rather than try to dictate to our pilots that's what they should or shouldn't do, we gave them the math. We said to them, here's the math, this is your profit sharers, your shareholders, here's the math. So one day I was flying to Vancouver, and I got into the flight deck, and I noticed the pilot looked at the fuel gauges, and I saw that he hadn't taken on enough fuel to fly to Vancouver and back again. I'm thinking, what the hell are you doing? There's a whole bunch of money to be saved here. What are you doing? So I'm getting pretty frustrated, and I'm watching this, but the rule is you don't say anything until 10,000 feet. So I'm sitting there, and my blood pressure is rising, and I can feel the vein in my neck pulsating like this, and thinking, why the heck didn't he take on enough fuel to fly back? So finally we get to 10,000 feet, and I turned to him and I said, so we're not ferrying fuel today? And he said, no, quite confidently. And I said, why? He said, the temperature outside today, up here at 38,000 feet, is minus 50 degrees. The relative humidity in Vancouver is 80%. The temperature in Vancouver is only +2. If we land with fuel on board, the cold-soaked fuel will cause frost to form on the wings, and we'll have to de-ice when we get there. And I figured out the cost of de-icing was this amount, and this is how much the fuel would save, and we'd save $384 by not doing it. Hallelujah, brother! It works. Finally, it worked. And he was over the moon. He was so excited about having saved $384. So I knew then that we'd actually made a difference. So that was one of my great learnings. The other was that I'm really proud to be able to say that over the course of our history, I think we've paid out some $300 million in profit sharing to our employees. That it really goes to thank them for all the contribution that they make and the experience that you have every day that you hopefully fly us. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if you don't fly us, but nevertheless, thank you very much if you do. It's a great honor to be here tonight, and thank you. And all I can say is, I think my father was wrong. He really missed out on the opportunity to fly the airplane instead of doing that math in the belly of the airplane. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, we move on now with our second inductee, Lorna deBlicquy, represented this evening by her daughter, Elaine.
From an early age, Lorna deBlicquy dedicated her life to aviation as a private pilot, barnstormer, bush pilot, charter pilot, and aviation inspector. Flying with wheels, skis, and floats, she distinguished herself as an instructor, and her accomplishments contributed to the advancement of equality for women in her chosen field. Lorna was born in Blythe, Ontario on November 30, 1931, to her mother Nora and father Maury, who served with the Canadian Army in the First World War and fought at Vimy Ridge. Lorna was the youngest of 3 children, having an older sister, Phyllis, and an older brother, Harry, who served as an RCAF pilot during the Second World War, flying Consolidated Liberator B-24 bombers for the Royal Air Force, which perhaps encouraged Lorna to develop an interest in aviation at an early age while still in school, where she was an excellent student, and worked part-time to pay for flying lessons in Ottawa, learning to fly in a J-3 Piper Cub at Atlas Aviation Flying School, making her first solo flight at age 15 after 7 hours and 40 minutes of instruction, then earning her private pilot license at 16 while still attending school, and made her first parachute jump while a teenager just to see what it was like. In 1952, Lorna earned her commercial license flying a Fleet Canuck at the Ottawa Flying Club, and got her first job in aviation as a navigator clerk with Spartan Air Services in Ottawa, which was operating a number of types flown in the Second World War. After graduation with a Bachelor of Arts degree from Carleton University in 1953, she married Tony Nichols and began her bush flying days in Manitoba, flying her own Aronka Chief on floats, gaining invaluable experience as a pioneer bush pilot in a field where female pilots were scarce. One of the aircraft she flew as a bush plane was a 1937 Waco biplane, CF-BBQ, known affectionately as Old Barbecue, an aircraft now restored to its original condition with new livery and registration and flown from its new home in the United States. In 1956, Lorna and Tony moved to Sudbury, where for 5 years she taught students to fly while also teaching high school at Nickel District Collegiate. In 1962, her marriage ended, and she then took up barnstorming in rural Quebec and flew as a flight instructor for Russell Bradley of Bradley Air Services in Carp, Ontario. Bradley's partner, Weldy Phipps, who was inducted into Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame in 1973, had developed the Tundra tire for use on terrain in the Arctic, and Lorna flew aircraft equipped with such tires while flying in the Arctic with husband Dick deBlicquy, whom she met as a fellow instructor at the Kingston Flying Club. From 1963 to 65, the couple flew in New Zealand, where Lorna worked on helicopters, gave flying instruction, flew tours, and earned a multi-engine endorsement, and had the opportunity to earn a private glider license as well. Returning to Canada, Lorna was an instructor at the Ottawa Flying Club, flew with her husband in the Arctic, and wrote about the success of Tundra tires used on Beaver aircraft that she flew for Atlas Aviation. Later, in 1986, the couple flew a Cessna 206 on famine relief flights in Ethiopia under challenging conditions on primitive runways. A competitive pilot, as well as an instructor and commercial pilot, for over 20 years, Lorna competed in women's air races, such as the Transcontinental Powder Puff Derby from Calgary, Alberta to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, flown with Betty Shermerhan in 1971, and in 1973 flew the adventurous Great Burlington Centennial Seaplane Race with fellow pilot and aviation columnist Neil McDougall. Lorna continued to add to her qualifications and experience in aviation, and her adventures in aviation made for good stories in the newspapers. But she was still working in a male-dominated field and had become an advocate for women in aviation, asserting her qualifications. And in 1977, she was hired by Transport Canada as the first female civil aviation inspector in Canada, flight testing instructor candidates, as well as doing commercial and multi-engine flight tests. In the following years, she was honored many times for her accomplishments, receiving the Order of Ontario in 1994, the Order of Canada in 1995, and made these comments when recognized in 1994 in the YMCA/YWCA Ottawa Carleton Women of Distinction Awards.
Ladies and gentlemen, it occurred to me that you have many speeches to which to listen tonight. I have a poem for you, and it's a little puzzle to see how it fits with my particular field because pilots are not always poets. But it's not my poem. It comes from the 12th century troubadour legends. Though our song cannot banish ancient wrong, though they follow where the rose goes, and this song, swooning over hollow ground, fade and leave the enchanted air bare. Yet the wise say that not unblessed he dies, who has lived a single May day. If we have laughed, loved, and labored in our craft, we may pass with a resigned mind. I have had the opportunity to laugh, love, and labor in my past, in my craft, passed on to me from women before me, and it is my hope that it will be passed on to women to come. Thank you.
Starting as a teenage pilot, Lorna spent over 50 years in flying, served as a role model, and continued to encourage women to pursue careers in aviation. Lorna deBlicquy was inducted as a member of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame at ceremonies held in Calgary on May 29, 2014.
Chris, I have actually read your book. I try to take instruction very well, and it did say that you had to prepare for the absolute worst. And so I practiced and practiced in the shoes, and I wore my best undergarments just in case I became airborne anyway. So
Come out and show people the shoes. Look at the nice shoes. They're good shoes. They're good shoes.
and then it does say, as my mom would have said, smile, look around, breathe. Okay. I'd like first of all to thank John Chalmers for the time and effort that went into putting together the video that you watched this evening. It does take an awfully lot of back and forthing with photos and content, and he accepted a great many of those suggestions very gracefully. On behalf of my mom, a very big thank you to the Board of Directors of the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame for bestowing on her the induction into its membership. It is indeed a great honor given to few in Canada, and I know she would have been particularly proud to join those illustrious members who, through civil and military aviation, have contributed so much to the development of this country. And now a really big thank you must go to those whose tireless efforts to nominate Mum made this evening a reality. I'm deeply grateful to the 99s, the International Organization of Women Pilots, particularly to Kathy Fox, Dorothy Bertholet, and Felicity McKendry. Kathy and Felicity are here this evening. Also to Shirley Render of the Western Canadian Aviation Museum, Kevin Tsutka of COPA, and Berta Aboud, Mom's lifelong friend. And to my family members coming from both sides of the country to lend support, my cousins, and to my husband for actually getting into the tux tonight. Several years before Mum passed away, she often remarked that she had no regrets, that she'd been so fortunate to be able to pursue her passion for flying and to be paid for it. She also expressed the wish to be a fly on the wall in 100 years, just to see how it all turns out. And while Mum had an inkling that she might be nominated for this very high honor, I think if she were here this evening, she'd be absolutely humbled to be joining the ranks of so many of her heroes. Vi Milstead, Marion Orr, Rosella Bjornson, Dee Brasseur, Julie Payette, her employer, Weldy Phipps, and her very great friend, Fern Villeneuve. Being asked to accept this honor on Mum's behalf tonight, I found myself feeling almost apologetic, for I spent far too many hours in the back seat of various aircraft, feeling, frankly, completely nauseated. Actually, occasionally tossing notes out the window saying, "Help, I'm being held hostage in the back of an Apache," which doubtless has some poor farmer in Pennsylvania or somewhere scratching his head. I would also whinge and whine about the lack of pressurization in whichever aircraft we were using to visit my grandparents in Florida. Coming from a family of pilots, my father, whom some of you know, my mother's brother, Leighton Bray, and my Uncle Harry, who was a World War II Burma bomber and whose son Jock and his wife Joanne are here this evening. My paternal grandfather was a test pilot for de Havilland's aircraft, the Mosquito, as well as also the instructor for Manitoba's first woman pilot, Eileen McGill. It is reasonably embarrassing to admit that I've never taken up the aviation torch held aloft by my mother. But stories, there are a few, and while you've had the opportunity to see many of the facts of Mum's aviation career through the video, I'm pretty certain that her career as a flying parent, nay, a flying mother, used only in the truest sense of the word, was an unexpected surprise in her life plan. Mum, always fiercely competitive and for whom excellence was not an act but a habit, did expect me to exhibit the same qualities. So when we moved to Resolute Bay in 1967, she had high expectations that my language acquisition would not be neglected, because when you're 1.5, it's very important to get full sentences. Finding a dearth of babysitters when both Mum and Dad were called out on flights, dispatchers for what was then Bradley Air Services were often recruited, much to their dismay, I'm sure, for some very early education. The odd outcome of this arrangement was my first full sentence. I hate this bloody place, I hate this bloody job. Mum was only mildly amused. When I parroted my full second sentence, which you'd have to ask me about later, it was time to leave the North. Settling in the Ottawa area for a number of years, the Mum I knew not only took instructing flying skills very seriously, but was also a loving, caring, and yes, fairly strict mother. I'd be taken out of school here and there for comprehensive education purposes, perhaps a ski day, an art gallery trip, or even a flight to Toronto to have skates fitted. All the while, Mum very expertly and wisely created in me a sense of adventure and independence, so that when the dream offer of a job as a civil aviation inspector with DOT came up, but the question, "What will you do with your daughter?" was asked, she was able to answer, "Boarding school." And I was actually thrilled. It's hard to believe in this day and age that barriers like that particular question, or "Can we find a uniform to fit you?" or "Could you use a men's washroom if the case arose?" You're overqualified as a co-pilot, underqualified as a pilot, and you have too many hours bush experience, would be faced by a woman applying to work with the airlines or in government positions nowadays. I'm so proud to be the daughter of a woman who helped remove the roadblocks to a robust career in aviation in Canada. And if you'll permit, this is a little anecdote from before I came along. It's not too long. Mum wrote this when she was writing for Reader's Digest and various funny things. So this was when she spent her winters, Canadian winters, she'd go down to New Zealand with my dad, and she was working at various aero clubs. So this is her voice. Working at various aero clubs or flying cruise ship passengers on sightseeing trips over Captain Cook's historic discoveries. New Zealand top-dressing strips remind Canadians of ski jumps, and every farm seems to have a shorter and steeper one. But what New Zealand also had was some very cheap old British Austers. There might have been a photo of an Auster there tonight. And they were for rent. And they also had a very quirky telephone system. You paid X pounds, shillings, and pence for a normal call, 2 times that for an urgent call, 5 times for an emergency call, and 10 times if it was really important and you called that a flash call. Wanting to see a bit more of the country, I rented an old Auster for a tour of the North Island. My husband Dick was off in the boonies, or the whoop-whoops as they were known locally, spraying gorse from an obsolete chopper. We arranged a time for a phone call on a specific evening. When it came time, I long-windedly, you see where I get it from, I long-windedly told him of the boiling mud at Rotorua, of the gorgeous waterfall along the coast, and extolled the virtues of all the great people who'd shown hospitality at the various stops en route. All recalled their days during World War II on the prairies, learning to fly with the British Commonwealth Air Training Program. I was just getting my second wind when he interrupted with, "I have something to tell you." I countered with, "And I have something to tell you." He went ahead with, "The truck carrying everything we own, including our passports, tickets home, and our traveler's checks, blew up, and we own what we're standing in." I shot back with, "The inline engine on the Oster hates its metal prop. The crankshaft cracked, the prop flew off into the whoop-whoops. There was nowhere suitable to land, and I've almost become the second person to swim the Cook Strait, and I've done $600 damage to an uninsured aircraft." Then the insistent voice of the operator broke in with, "I'm sorry, we need this line for a flash call." That was all we knew about each other until we read the next morning's paper. So, on behalf of Lorna, I'd like to congratulate Clive, Fred, Robert on their inductions, and thank all of you aviation enthusiasts and families for your very kind support this evening.
We now move on to our third inductee, Robert Engle.
Following service in the United States Navy and graduation from Yale University, Robert Engle flew his own aircraft to northern Canada, settling in Yellowknife. He flew as a bush pilot, then built his airline, Northwest Territorial Airways, and related businesses that have had lasting effects on transportation in the North. Born in Seattle on July 12, 1923, Robert Engle attended school at the Phillips Exeter Academy, established in New Hampshire in 1781. And after receiving his education there, he volunteered for active duty in the United States Naval Reserve during the Second World War. After the war, he left the Navy as a lieutenant and attended Yale University, graduating in 1950 with a Bachelor of Science degree. And that year, Bob sailed aboard his father's sloop on a cruise of British Columbia's Inside Passage to Prince Rupert, BC, and circumnavigated Vancouver Island. Bob's grandfather, William Parsons, had traveled to Dawson City in 1898 during the Klondike Gold Rush, and perhaps it was Dawson City's spell of the Yukon that lured Bob to visit northern Canada, when he flew his Cessna 180 on floats to Yellowknife in 1956 to pursue commercial aviation opportunities in the north, and soon found there were other attractions offered in the land he would adopt. Within 2 years, Bob was contracting his Beaver to Ward Air and flying an Otter and a Bristol freighter for the company, and by 1961 he had established his own operation, Northwest Territorial Airways. Purchase of a de Havilland Otter led to bush charter operations in 1962, and in 1963, to improve service, the young aviation company added a Beech 18, which Bob equipped with wheels, skis, and floats to use the aircraft's versatility to land anywhere. And his favorite engine was a radial piston engine, the Pratt & Whitney Wasp Jr. on his Beech 18. The purchase of NWT Air's first DC-3, equipped with skis and wheels, soon followed, an aircraft that today is preserved at the Aerospace Museum of Calgary. After selling his bush flying operations, Bob built the first hangar at the Yellowknife Airport. NWT Air became the first airline to base heavy transport aircraft at its new facilities, and the new hangar was big enough to accommodate the company's biggest aircraft, including the Lockheed Hercules that would be added to the fleet 10 years later. In 1968, the airline began service to the Central Arctic coast at Coppermine and to other communities with the DC-3. Service increased again with larger aircraft in 1971, with purchase of 2 Douglas DC-6s, Bob's favorite aircraft, while he continued flying as the senior pilot for the airline. Bob Engle saw his company grow in size and service with larger multi-engine aircraft, eventually including Boeing 737 jet aircraft. During all this time, the company remained based in Yellowknife and focused on northern Canada.
NWT Air of Yellowknife took delivery of L-130 Hercules HPW in the late 1970s, when company founder Bob Engle acquired the aircraft from PWA. With exception to temporary assignments in Africa, the Gulf War I, and other jobs, the Herc has been Yellowknife based ever since. Long before diamonds became big business in the Northwest Territories, the early 1990s was a period of intense exploration in the region. In the fall of 1993, NWTR Herc HPW was engaged in an airlift from Yellowknife to the Salamita airstrip, some 160 miles north of the territorial capital.
Expansion of aviation services in northern Canada did not come easily, but Bob persevered over many years, with success in extending routes served by NWT Air. As well, Bob established other companies, including Northwest Transport Limited, to provide highway transport and truck service to complement cargo and passenger service of his airline. Honored many times for his contributions to the North, Bob Engle was invested as a member of the Order of Canada in 1990. Appointed as an honorary colonel to RCAF 440 Transport Squadron, and in 2007, a new industrial subdivision in Yellowknife was named for him, recognizing 50 years of contribution to the community. The founding president of the Northern Air Transport Association, and now an honorary life member, Robert Engle was a keynote speaker at the annual convention in Whitehorse in 2014. After arriving in Yellowknife as a young man with his Cessna 180 on floats, Bob Engle began a half-century of adventure in northern Canada with lasting effects on air transportation for cargo and passengers, as he continued to build and expand his airline from bush planes to multi-engine transport aircraft, in a life that provided the opportunity to entertain royalty in his home and meet Canadian prime ministers while involved in business and community activity. After selling his company and resigning as chairman and CEO, the routes pioneered by Bob Engle are still operating with aircraft service today, while leaving time for Bob to enjoy life with family, friends, and a lifelong interest in sailing. Robert Engle was inducted as a member of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame at ceremonies held in Calgary, Alberta on May 29, 2014.
What a special event. 50 years living in Yellowknife, I never really imagined that I would be here among such a distinguished group of aviators and those that are part of the aviation community. And I'm indeed truly honored. To our guests, all 80 of them, thank you for all your support. And to Tom Appleton, the directors, and capable staff, including John Chalmers. He's just fantastic, working together. A great historian and a great part of the staff here. Thank you for the opportunity to join many of our distinguished members and leaders in the aviation community. My compliments to the airmen who pioneered the early aviation bush flying days in Canada's north. There's so many that as a young pilot, they were idols and names that have become famous in the Aviation Hall of Fame. Looking back, we looked at the skies with our Astro Sun Compass for true heading and Polaris high in the polar skies for navigation at night. This was before global positioning. This was before satellite communications. The North was still being surveyed by Spartan Aero Services and others for high altitude charting. We flew our flights by managing the risk and limiting the daring. Thanks for support of so many of you in the preparation of this evening, including Pat Riley, son of old friends of the Hall, Jack and Molly Riley, all three members of the Hall. Jack gave me my DC-3 type endorsement in 1964 in Edmonton. And Molly was often with her twin-engine executive Beechcraft, would always have a place in my hangar when she was heading south. Don Yamkoe, Northern Aviation Historical Foundation. Don has been so helpful to me over a period of years in getting me to focus on history, because being so active in doing, looking back historically, I found required a great deal of thought, an emotional feeling going back over 50 and 60 years. And I thank you, Don, for being at my side. Chris Tuck, Colonel, Royal Canadian Air Force, 440 Transport Squadron in Yellowknife, of which I was an honorary colonel. Victor Irving, Victor, there in your RCMP address, Government of the Northwest Territories. You've always been there to encourage me and to look ahead, and more recently, to document events. Miles Harris, and all of you 80 strong from our NWTR family. So if you'll give me a special privilege of asking those that came this distance to please stand, because I am honoring you as well, including my children. Would you please stand? The NWTR. Thank you so much. And of course, a very special thanks to my darling Roxy. Amazing. She has held us together throughout the preparation for this evening. And again, my three children, James, Alexandra, Emma, my nephew Bill, Nancy, his wife, Mark Penny, Roxy's brother. I would like to make a special acknowledgement this evening. Sitting at this first table are my good friends John and Giles Turner, who along with their 4 children over a period of 2 decades during the summer crewed, canoed the northern rivers of the Northwest Territories that flow northward to the Arctic Ocean. Many of you have shared the rapid change in climate we are now experiencing with global warming, resulting in the opening of the Arctic Oceans. This is a game changer. The vast territory of the North is Canada's new frontier, and aviation has led the way. Thank you.
Okay, we go on with our 4th inductee for this evening, Fred Moore.
Fred Moore served the Royal Canadian Air Force as a pilot and test pilot with responsibility for testing and acceptance of RCAF aircraft and development of flight simulators. Leaving military service as a squadron leader, he continued in aviation as a senior manager in civil aviation and the helicopter industry. Born in Victoria, British Columbia on November 26, 1928, Fred Moore was the only son and the first of 7 children born to his parents, Alex and Benny. followed by 6 sisters, Cynthia, Sylvia, Marcia, Martha, Pamela, and Alexis. Following high school graduation, Fred was selected for entry into the 1st Air Force class at Royal Roads Military College in Victoria. He graduated on May 1, 1949, and joined the Royal Canadian Air Force, selected for pilot training. And following basic training with his class at No. 1 Manning Depot in the summer of 1949, then flying on Harvard and Expediter aircraft, he earned his wings as a pilot officer at No. 1 Flying Training School at RCAF Station Centralia. And his first posting was to the Winter Experimental Establishment in Edmonton, where he flew the famed warbird, the P-51 Mustang, and had the opportunity to experience winter survival training with personnel from the RCAF, the USAF, and other organizations. At 23, in 1952, he was accepted into the United States Air Force Experimental Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Promoted to flight lieutenant, Fred returned to Canada and was assigned the responsibility for flight testing and acceptance of jet aircraft for the RCAF. In 1953, he was transferred to Canadair in Montreal to take command of RCAF flight testing and acceptance of the Canadair T-33 Silver Star, the F-86 Sabre aircraft, and assisted in development and acceptance of simulators for the F-86. And at Avro and de Havilland in Toronto, Fred was responsible for flight testing of the Avro CF-100, as well as other de Havilland types, including flight testing of the aircraft's Advanced Weapons Fire Control System. Fred Moore was a pioneer in the Canadian flight simulator industry with a pivotal role ensuring that aircraft and simulators met RCAF specifications. From 1955 to 1958, he was in charge of accepting 18 different types from 8 Canadian aircraft companies. In 1955, he was also assigned to Canadian Aviation Electronics Limited in Montreal for RCAF assistance in developing simulators for CF-100 aircraft.
Designed to meet a Royal Canadian Air Force specification for a long-range, all-weather day and night interceptor, the CF-100 is capable of operating anytime, anywhere, in the sub-zero temperatures of the Arctic or beneath the blazing sun of the tropics. These tests are but preliminary to the intensive pre-delivery flight testing the aircraft will undergo before its final release for Air Force service. The aircraft is first test flown by one of the Avro test pilots. The test pilots are men with a wide background of technical and flying experience, including operational flying. They know the high capabilities inherent in the CF-100 and ensure that each aircraft meets these exacting standards before it is cleared for delivery. When the aircraft passes the test pilot's critical appraisal, it is ready for the final stages of its pre-delivery preparation, harmonization, and calibration of the armament and fire control system.
Later, at RCAF headquarters, Fred produced the blueprint for the 104 Starfighter simulator used by the RCAF and German, Netherlands, Belgian, and Italian Air Forces. On October 9, 1963, Fred took his release from the Air Force with the rank of squadron leader, accepting a position with Northwest Industries in Edmonton, Alberta. It was a move that saw him relocate with his family to Alberta's capital city and start a new phase in his career. The company had been acquired by CAE and was involved in the repair and overhaul of RCAF aircraft. Fred's new responsibilities were to spearhead the company's diversification into industrial products and later into civil aviation. By 1968, he was Vice President of Marketing and Contracts with responsibility for civilian aircraft sales and service. He also oversaw the company's fiberglass reinforced plastics division, including development of 5,000-gallon underground storage tanks, which replaced steel tanks. A new opportunity arose for Fred in September 1970 as marketing manager of Okanagan Helicopters Limited, and he moved to Richmond, BC. In 1972, he was promoted to Vice President Marketing. In 1981, he was promoted to Senior Vice President, and his responsibility included development of new business and the company's growth in the international offshore oil support market. The company flew helicopters across the Arctic and the Atlantic, and routinely ferried helicopters from Canada to and from India, Thailand, and China. In 1987, the company was sold to become part of the new Canadian Helicopters Corporation, with Moore remaining as Senior Vice President. In aviation for half a century, first as an RCAF officer, then as a senior executive in the industry, and as chairman of the Helicopter Association International, Fred Moore was well respected in Canadian and international aviation fraternities. Fred flew more than 50 types of aircraft, ranging from single-engine trainers to four-engine bombers, airliners, and the fastest jet aircraft of the RCAF. In 1991, Fred retired from Canadian Helicopters Corporation, retained his youthful interest in fishing, and he continues to fly private light aircraft at every opportunity. Frederick Moore was inducted as a member of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame at ceremonies held in Calgary, Alberta on May 29, 2014.
Well, good evening all, and what a grand occasion. I would like to compliment the Aviation Hall of Fame, WestJet, and Chris for producing such a class act here tonight. It's a great show. I am indeed honored, proud, and grateful to be standing here. I am also forever grateful for the tireless efforts of the late Hugh Roberts for his nomination of me. Hugh was a skilled pilot and a great friend who tragically lost his life in a highway accident last October. Thankfully, he did know his nomination and all his efforts had been successful, and he was very much looking forward to being here. So we are very pleased that Hugh's wife, Mary, is with us tonight. I am indebted to my family, who are also here, for their support while I was involved in my aviation career. My four sons, Alan, Michael, David, and Rod, and my special wife, Michaeline, who, by the way, was at one time the Chief of the Air Staff Secretary. Nothing like friends in high places. A few minutes ago, while I was watching that person up on the screen who used to be me, I realized how fortunate I was to have been part of some of the greatest decades in the history of Canadian aviation. It was those times that really shaped my career. Certainly the 1950s were the golden years for the expanding Air Force, with many new air bases and a massive influx of overhauled and new made-in-Canada jet aircraft. Over 3,000 airplanes on my watch alone, including 718 CF-100s, Canada's own, and the Mark V was my favorite airplane. The Air Force also led the way in flight simulation, and I am gratified that I was able to assist CAE in Montreal through its early, difficult years. Today, that company is the world's largest manufacturer of flight simulators. In the 1950s, the legend of the Avro Arrow began, and the Canadian Navy had a very operational aircraft carrier. Boy, those were the days. The 1960s were big years for civil aviation. Flying clubs thrived. Ownership of private aircraft was big. Business aviation was growing, and airlines changed for all time with the arrival of large jet airliners. Northwest Industries in Edmonton got its share, including the manufacture of large major components for the Lockheed L-1011, and the space age arrived big time. The 1970s were the great years for the Canadian helicopter industry. The entry of gas turbine helicopters with very much better performance, comfort, and safety altered everything. Gone were the days when cars on the highways below would pass you. In the 1970s, Okanagan Helicopters in Vancouver became a large, world-class company. First to cross the Atlantic in a civil helicopter, first to fly IFR, and a specialist in virtually every helicopter application. Okanagan is probably the only helicopter carrier to have routinely flown helicopters IFR from Vancouver to and from Asia, via Europe, of course, not the Pacific. My biggest contribution was to lead the company into the large, profitable international offshore petroleum sport market, where the company became a global player, and the company flourished. In 1987, Okanagan Helicopters was sold and became the major part of a new company called Canadian Helicopters, which with further growth later became CHC. Today, CHC, with 240 large helicopters in 30 countries, is the world's largest helicopter services company, and its headquarters are in Vancouver, not far from the old abandoned Okanagan hangar where it all began. I'm very proud of Canada's aviation history, especially for those times that I've just mentioned. I am especially proud of Canada's helicopter industry and its history. It has always been a world leader and a credit to Canada. I am honored by the recognition that I have been given here tonight and very proud to be a member of the Aviation Hall of Fame. In closing, I'd like to congratulate my fellow inductees on becoming members of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. Perhaps not the youngest, but certainly the newest. I thank you. I want you to enjoy the rest of your evening and be proud of Canada's aviation history. Thank you very much.
Chris Hadfield is one of the best known and beloved Canadians at home and around the world, literally. He symbolizes what it means to be an aviation pioneer, innovator, and leader. Tout comme les autres membres du Panthéon, Chris Hadfield avait un rêve d'un jour devenir astronaute et de voyager dans l'espace. Ce rêve, il le caressait depuis sa tendre enfance. In his Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, he recalls his impression at seeing Neil Armstrong on television set foot on the moon back in July 1969. For him, it was the impossible made possible. He was 9 years old, and he knew with absolute clarity that he wanted to be an astronaut. He also knew that it was impossible in Canada. Astronauts were American, and Canada didn't even have a space agency at the time. But then, just the day before, it had been impossible to walk on the moon. The life of Chris Hadfield is a reminder of how important it is to retain a strong sense of purpose and optimism, even when a goal seems impossible to achieve. Chris, like many other people, I've read your book, and all of the comments that I've heard say, after reading your book, I'm a better person. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Chris Hadfield.
It's incredible to be up here with these four people on the stage. But really, I'm glad there's so many people here from family. I love that sound. I'm glad there's so many people here from family and friends of the four new inductees to the Hall, because the real purpose of tonight is as a celebration. And it's a celebration of these four people and the lives that they represent and the decisions that they represent. But the beauty of getting a group of people, getting us all dressed up, organizing a hall, getting things together, is it gives us an excuse to take a little pause away from normal life, honor some of the really distinguished and capable people amongst us, but also to reflect a little bit, a chance to actually think for a minute and to look at how we got here, to look at the past that has been so beautifully lived and evidenced by these four folks. The motto of the Hall is unselfishly, they showed the way. And that way has led us right across the whole country and through history and give us a perspective on it that is vital to be able to make the proper decisions in the future.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, our 2014 induction ceremony has come to an end. One last big hoorah for our 2014 inductees.